check is for $50,000. There is no way a woman dressed like you has this kind of money. It's obviously stolen.
I'm giving you one chance to verify the account. My name is on the building, and my signature is on your paycheck.
You? You own the company? That's the most pathetic lie I've ever heard.
Officer, arrest her right now. She stole this check, and she's trying to rob us blind. The manager's voice didn't just carry across the lobby. It cut through the air like a serrated blade, turning every head in the building toward a woman who stood perfectly still. On the polished marble counter sat a check with too many zeros for the manager's comfort. He didn't see a client. He saw a criminal. He didn't see a founder. He saw a target. What he didn't realize was that the handcuffs he was begging for weren't going to end her career. They were about to end his. Diana Landrum had spent 30 years building an empire from nothing, turning a small startup into a multi-billion-dollar investment firm that owned the very ground this bank was built on. She was a woman who navigated shark-infested boardrooms and signed off on international mergers before lunch. But on this Tuesday morning, she wasn't the chairwoman. She was just a woman in a simple blazer and an orange top, looking to cash a personal check for a local charity. She walked into the branch on West Trade Street expecting the efficiency she demanded from her own executives, but instead, she found herself trapped in a nightmare of prejudice. The manager, a man who had spent his career gatekeeping his lobby against people he deemed suspicious, looked at Diana's braids and her casual attire and made the most expensive mistake of his life. He assumed she didn't belong in his world, unaware that he was actually standing in hers. She almost didn't go. That's the part nobody ever talks about, the moment before the moment. The quiet Tuesday morning when Diana Landrum stood at her penthouse window in bare feet, holding a mug of coffee she'd made herself because the housekeeper didn't come on Tuesdays, watching Atlanta wake up 40 stories below her and almost decided to send someone else. She had built a company worth $900 million on the discipline of delegation. She had an operations team. She had a legal team. She had a chief of staff whose entire job was to make sure Diana Landrum never had to stand in a line. But the letter, the one her assistant had clipped with a sticky note that just said, "You should read this one yourself." That letter had been sitting on the edge of her mind for 3 weeks like something unresolved, like a question she hadn't answered honestly yet. It had come from a woman named Gloria. No last name. Just Gloria. And Gloria had written, in the careful handwriting of someone who had chosen every word deliberately, about the day she walked into the Peachtree Street branch of Landrum Financial to deposit her legal settlement. The check she had waited 4 years and 1 destroyed marriage to receive, and was told by the branch manager that her check looked irregular. That she was held in the lobby for 40 minutes while the manager made calls that no one came back to explain. That when she finally asked what was happening, a security guard was summoned. That she stood there, in front of strangers, with her settlement check in her hand and her dignity bleeding out on the marble floor, until she finally left without depositing a single dollar. The letter ended with 8 words that had burned themselves into Diana's memory. "I thought your company was supposed to be different." Diana set down the mug. She went to her closet. She did not reach for the Armani blazer, or the tailored slacks, or anything that performed, in the silent language of professional clothing, the words "I am not to be dismissed." She pulled on dark jeans, a white cotton top, the small gold bracelet her mother had pressed into her palm the morning Diana signed the founding documents of Landrum Financial, 15 years ago, in a church basement in Vine City, with $11,000 in seed money and an absolute refusal to believe that the neighborhood she came from was worth any less than the ones that already had everything. She wrote the check in the elevator. $50,000. Landrum Community Trust. Her signature at the bottom, bold, unhurried, completely certain. The money was for the financial literacy center she'd been funding quietly for 2 years, in the same neighborhood, where she'd watched her mother get eaten alive by predatory lenders who wore suits and called it banking. She folded the check. She put it in her pocket. She stepped out into the morning. She had no idea, not really, not in the cellular body level way you know things when they're happening to you, what she was walking into. She thought she was going to audit a branch. She didn't know she was about to have her own beliefs audited. If you've ever walked into a room and immediately felt like you were being assessed before you said a word, you already know where this story is going. Stay with me. Marcus Webb had arrived at the Peachtree branch at 8:15 that morning, same as always, 45 minutes before the doors opened. He poured his coffee from the machine in the break room. The same machine, the same mug, the same ritual he had performed at this branch for 7 years. And he sat at his desk, and he looked at the morning's projected transactions, and he felt what Marcus always felt at the start of a day in his branch: ownership. Not legal ownership. He understood perfectly well he didn't own anything in that building, but the particular ownership that comes from never having been told no, from having your judgment trusted without examination, from walking through a lobby where people look up when you enter, because you are the authority here, and everyone has learned that lesson already. Marcus had learned his own lesson early, somewhere he couldn't quite pinpoint, about which customers required scrutiny and which didn't. He had packaged this lesson in professional language, pattern recognition, risk assessment, fiduciary due diligence, and he had applied it for 7 years with the quiet confidence of a man who had never been made to look at the pattern directly. What the pattern actually was: 7 formal complaints, all from Black or Latino customers, all describing the same experience in different words. A manager who looked at them and saw a problem before they opened their mouths. A physician who had her cashier's check held for verification for 55 minutes, while the actual phone call that could have resolved it in 30 seconds sat unmade on Marcus's desk. A college student told that large deposits from students raise red flags. His scholarship money, earned by grades and need and years of work, treated like evidence. A man who raised his voice in justified frustration after being publicly accused of using a stolen debit card, and found himself talking to police instead of a supervisor. 7 complaints, all logged. None acted upon. Somewhere in a regional HR filing system, they sat like unanswered prayers, organized, categorized, and completely ignored by a regional director who looked at Marcus's fraud numbers and chose arithmetic over accountability. Marcus had interpreted this silence the way people like Marcus always interpret institutional silence: as agreement, as permission, as proof that he was right. He had no reason, sitting at his desk that Tuesday morning with his coffee and his certainty, to believe this was the day the silence ended. He was about to have that certainty dismantled piece by piece in front of an audience. Before we get to what happened at that counter, if this story is hitting close to home for you, drop a comment below. Tell me where you're watching from. You'd be surprised how many people have a version of this story. I'll be reading every single one. Diana walked through the glass doors at 10:23 in the morning. She joined the line like a person who had come to cash a check, because that was the point. Because the entire exercise depended on no one knowing that the woman in the dark jeans standing third from the teller window owned the building she was standing in. She waited. She watched the lobby move around her. She noticed, in the methodical way she noticed everything, the small choreography of the place. The teller who laughed too loud at a customer's joke, the security guard near the door who scrolled his phone between scans, the manager who appeared briefly from the back hallway, swept the room with a single practiced glance and disappeared again. She noticed that the glance paused on her, briefly. Just briefly. She noticed that too. When she reached the window, she placed the check face down on the counter, and then turned it over in one smooth motion. The teller, young, 2 months in, still at the stage where every large transaction triggered a small internal alarm, looked at it, looked up at Diana, looked back at the check, and said, with the reflexive politeness of someone buying time, "Let me just grab my manager for this one." Diana nodded. She waited. Her hands were flat on the counter, relaxed, unhurried. Inside, something had already begun to tighten, the way weather changes before the sky shows it. Marcus came out from the back with his shoulders set, and his face arranged in the expression he used for situations he had already decided. He looked at the check. He looked at Diana. Something shifted behind his eyes. Not dramatic, not a sneer. Nothing you could take to HR on its own. Just a flatness, a door closing. The particular look of a man whose conclusion has arrived before his evidence. "This account," he said, in a voice designed to sound reasonable, "appears to be a business account." "It's a personal account," Diana said. "The account number is printed on the check. I'll need 2 forms of ID." She gave him her driver's license and her Landrum Financial Platinum card. The Platinum card, for context, is issued only to personal account holders carrying a minimum balance of $2 million. It is, in the banking world, a fairly unambiguous signal. Marcus looked at both cards. "Set them on the counter the way you set down evidence you intend to question." "The signature on this check," he said, "doesn't match what we have on file." Diana looked at him. "Then pull up the file." "Ma'am, I'm not going to be able to process this transaction today." "Why not?" "I have concerns about the authenticity of this document." She kept her voice level. She had spent 41 years learning how to keep her voice level, and it had cost her something. It always costs something to hold the calm while something is burning underneath it. But she held it. "Are you telling me you believe this check is forged?" Marcus tilted his head. That careful, practiced tilt. "I'm telling you that people at this branch don't typically present checks of this size without prior arrangement. People at this branch. Not accounts, not customers, people." Diana looked at the check still sitting on the counter between them. She looked at her ID cards, still between them. She looked at Marcus Webb, who had just told her, in the only language his caution would allow, what he thought of her. And she made a decision, not the decision she would make in 11 minutes, but a smaller, older one. The one she had made 100 times before in 100 rooms like this. She was not going to perform distress for him. She was not going to raise her voice. She was not going to give him anything that could be used to justify what he was already doing. "I'd like to speak with your regional director," she said. "Our regional director is not available." "Then I'll wait." Marcus picked up the phone. The officers arrived in 11 minutes. Two of them, in the particular measured calm of people who have walked into many rooms and decided the temperature before they cross the threshold. The first one, older, methodical, the kind of practiced professional stillness that comes from years of managed volatility, did what officers do in these moments. He read the room. He looked at Marcus. He looked at Diana. He looked at Marcus again. And in the grammar of that glance, the decision was made, because Marcus was standing with the bearing of a man who had called for backup, and Diana was standing at the counter in jeans, and the officer's eyes put those two facts together into a sentence that did not require him to examine its assumptions. Marcus spoke first. He always spoke first. He had the cadence of a man who understood that in a room with divided authority, the person who frames the story first usually wins. He explained, with meticulous reasonableness, that he had a customer who had presented what appeared to be a fraudulent check, that he had attempted to resolve the matter quietly, that the customer had become uncooperative, a word Diana filed internally with the cold precision of someone cataloging evidence because she had not raised her voice once, had not moved from the counter, had not done a single thing that a reasonable observer would call uncooperative, except refuse to be dismissed. The first officer turned to Diana. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step over here." "I am a customer in this branch," Diana said. "I have presented a valid check drawn on a verified account, and this man has refused to process it without legitimate cause. I would like the reason for that refusal documented. We can sort that out, but right now, I'd like it documented," she said again. Quietly, completely still, the officer moved. His partner moved. And the lobby, the ordinary Tuesday morning lobby full of people who had come to do the ordinary business of their ordinary lives, went completely silent. This is the moment Diana would come back to, later, sitting in her car in the parking structure for 20 minutes before she could drive. Not the confrontation itself, not what came after. This moment, the silence, because it was in the silence that she felt the full weight of what was happening. She looked around that lobby. A woman at the second teller window had stopped mid-sentence and was watching with her hand still extended, as if her body had frozen mid-gesture. A man near the door had his phone halfway out of his pocket. A young mother with a stroller had quietly positioned herself closer to the exit, and the teller, Brianna, young, 2 months in, still learning, was looking at her hands. Not at Marcus, not at Diana, at her own hands, like someone who had watched something they couldn't unwatch and didn't know yet what to do with it. These were her customers. In her building, in a branch that carried her name and her founding mission, access to capital is access to dignity, on a plaque bolted to the wall 12 feet from where she was standing. These people had come to a Landrum Financial branch because of what Diana had built and what she had promised. And they were watching a Landrum Financial manager use the police as a weapon against a black woman at the counter, and nobody was stopping it. And she understood, not for the first time, but for the first time in her own body, in a way that could not be explained away or delegated or resolved with better language in a policy document, that she had been wrong. She had believed, with the stubborn idealism of someone who had built something real, that if you constructed the right institution with the right values and hired with the right intentions, the people would follow the mission. She had believed the architecture would protect the culture. She had been standing at her floor-to-ceiling window in bare feet that morning watching Atlanta wake up, and trusting, somewhere in the part of herself that needed to trust it, that the city she was looking at was fairer than the one she'd grown up in. It wasn't, and it was her name on the door. "I need you to stay with me for the next part, because this is where Diana does something that takes more courage than anything else in this story. She doesn't run. She doesn't break. She makes a choice. Hit that like button if you want her to win, and keep watching, because what happens next is going to make your jaw drop." She turned back to Marcus. Her voice when she spoke was so quiet that the officers had to adjust their stance just slightly, unconsciously leaning forward to catch it. "Mr. Webb, just his name first." She let it land. "I'm going to ask you one time to pick up that phone and call your regional director. Not the main line, his direct number. His name is Richard Okafor, and you have it. I want you to call him, tell him where you are and what you're doing, and then let him tell you who I am. I'm giving you 60 seconds. Marcus looked at her with the expression of a man who has never lost this kind of confrontation. "Ma'am, I've already explained. I'm not asking about the check," Diana said. "I'm asking you to call Richard Okafor. 60 seconds, Mr. Webb. And then things change. And I want you to understand, when I say things change, I mean permanently." Something moved across Marcus's face. If it was doubt, it didn't survive. He had too much history of winning to let doubt grow. He had 7 years of unchallenged authority to draw on, 7 years of complaints that went nowhere, and silence that meant yes. And he looked at Diana Landrum, in her jeans, with her bracelet, with no title walking in front of her, and he made the decision that ended his career. He turned to the officer. "I'd like to proceed." The officer reached for his belt. Diana did not move. She stood with her hands visible, her back straight, her face carrying the expression she had been building all her life for a moment exactly like this. Not defiance, not fear, not performance. Just refusal. Absolute, unbreakable refusal to let this room take anything more from her than it already had. And then the glass doors opened. They came in 3, and they moved like people who had somewhere specific to be and intended to arrive. Sylvia Park, Diana's general counsel, and a former federal prosecutor, who crossed a room the way she had once crossed a courtroom, with the efficient certainty of someone who has already won and is simply completing the formality. Behind her, Derek Malone, Diana's head of operations, carrying a leather portfolio and the particular expression of a man who has been waiting a long time to be useful in exactly this way. And behind him, a woman none of them recognized except Diana, a regional compliance officer from the State Banking Authority, who had received a call 40 minutes ago and driven directly here, because when the State Banking Authority gets a call with the specificity and the documentation that this call had contained, they move. Diana had sent one text, 11 minutes ago, to her assistant, who had worked with her for 6 years and understood the architecture of a single word, Peachtree. Sylvia Park did not run. She didn't need to. She placed herself between Diana and the officer with the practiced ease of someone who has stood in harder places. And she said to the first officer, in a voice that did not require volume to fill the room, "My name is Sylvia Park. I'm general counsel for Landrum Financial Group. I need you to hold that action while I present documentation to your supervisor." The officer paused. Paused was enough. Derek Malone opened the portfolio on the nearest counter and laid 3 documents side by side with the neat finality of a hand being laid on a table. The corporate registration of Landrum Financial Group, with Diana Landrum listed as founder and majority shareholder, the property lease for this branch location, signed by Diana Landrum, and an organizational chart, 1 page, Diana's name and photograph at the top. He put his hand on the photograph. He looked at Marcus Webb. He said nothing, because there was nothing left to say. Marcus looked at the photograph. He looked at Diana. He looked at the photograph again. And the color, what little there was of it, left his face the way heat leaves a room when the door opens in winter. All at once, and completely. The compliance officer stepped forward and asked the officers to stand down pending review of the situation. The first officer looked from Sylvia to the documents to Marcus, and the grammar of authority shifted in the room so cleanly and completely that everyone present felt it, even the people who couldn't have articulated what they were feeling. Marcus Webb had called the police on the owner of the building he was standing in. The police had just been informed of this fact by a former federal prosecutor holding corporate documents. There was no version of this that ended differently from the way it was about to end. The look on Marcus's face when he realized, comment below with 1 word. I'll be in the comments. Diana let the silence go exactly as long as it needed to go. She had learned, over 20 years of rooms where her presence was questioned before her credentials, that silence was not an absence. It was a wait. She let it settle over Marcus Webb until he was standing inside it with nowhere to move. "Pull his complaint history," she said to Derek. Derek had it in 30 seconds. He read it aloud with the steady, uninflected pace of someone reading a verdict that has already been rendered. 7 formal complaints in 6 years. All from Black or Latino customers. All describing the same essential experience, just in different voices, from different days, in different words that somehow amounted to the same wound. A manager who had decided what they were before they spoke, and then used the machinery of the institution to make his decision feel like procedure. The physician. The student. The man who raised his voice and got a police call instead of a supervisor. 3 complaints marked, resolved. None resulting in discipline. All of them now living in the active file of a State Banking Authority investigation that had been opened 41 minutes ago. Marcus said nothing. He had run out of language. The professional vocabulary, the pattern recognition, the risk assessment, the fiduciary due diligence had evaporated, and what was left was just a man standing in a lobby holding nothing. Diana looked at him for a long moment. She thought about the speech she had constructed somewhere on the drive over, the precise, devastating things she would say when this moment arrived. She let it go, not because he didn't deserve it, because this wasn't about him. It had never really been about him. He was the symptom. She was the one who had left the condition untreated. "You're done," she said. It was not loud. It didn't need to be. "Security will escort you to collect your personal items. Your access to every Landrum Financial location has been revoked as of this moment. You will not return." She paused. "I hope you use this time to look at something honestly. Because what happened here today didn't happen because you had a bad day. It happened because for 7 years, the people above you chose to look away. They made you think the silence meant you were right. It didn't, and that ends today, for you and for the people who let you. Marcus Webb walked out of the building without a word. The glass doors closed behind him. Diana turned to face the lobby. To all the people who had watched all of it, the woman with her hand still frozen at the teller window, the man with his phone now fully out, Brianna still looking at her hands. The woman near the window who was quietly crying, though Diana didn't know why exactly, whether it was relief or recognition or something else entirely, something private that this moment had unlocked for her. Diana looked at all of them, and she said, "I'm sorry. Not the managed, liability-conscious sorry. The real one, the kind that costs something. You came in here to do something ordinary on an ordinary Tuesday, and you watched something happen in this building that should never happen in any building, least of all one with my name on it. I own this company, and I am responsible for the culture that made today possible. That changes now." The woman near the window wiped her eyes. Someone started clapping. Diana shook her head slightly. This was not the moment for that, and people understood, and they stopped. What followed in the 3 weeks after that Tuesday was the kind of reckoning that institutions usually perform in press releases and sensitivity trainings, the kind that feel like accountability but cost no one anything permanent. Diana did not do that. The regional director, who had buried 7 complaints over 6 years, was placed on administrative leave the same evening, pending a full independent review of his oversight record. He did not return. A new branch manager, Tanya Bridges, 15 years in community banking, a woman whose former branches had wait lists because customers trusted her, was appointed to Peachtree Street within 10 days. The entire regional management team was convened for a mandatory 2-day audit. Not a workshop. An audit, with findings, with consequences. 11 managers were separated from the company. 23 more were placed on structured performance plans, with monthly review cycles and specific behavioral benchmarks that had never existed before, because Diana had never before been willing to look at what they needed to cover. And then she wrote the policy. 3 pages. She called it Diana's Law, over her general counsel's mild objection that it was too personal. Diana told Sylvia that personal was exactly what it needed to be. The policy mandated independent verification of any customer complaint within 5 business days. It required every branch manager to review their own escalation and flagging data, broken down by customer demographics, every quarter. It established a direct reporting line to the corporate ethics office that bypassed the regional layer entirely, so that the next Gloria would not write a letter that sat in an inbox for 3 weeks. Any employee who called law enforcement on a customer without documented evidence of active threat would face immediate review. Any manager who did it twice would be terminated. No exceptions. No quiet conversations, with no consequences. No silence that could be interpreted as permission. On the day the policy was formally adopted, Diana had her portrait hung in the lobby of the Peachtree branch. Not large, not ceremonial, just visible, at the exact eye level of anyone standing at the teller counter. A black woman in dark jeans, and a white top, and a small gold bracelet. No title, no suit, no armor, just her face, and below it, one line in the clean, spare font the company used for everything that mattered most. This branch belongs to her community. Treat it that way. She had built Landrum Financial on a belief that access to capital was access to dignity, that black communities deserved institutions that operated as if their money was real, their presence was legitimate, their time was valuable, their humanity was not a question to be answered before service was rendered. She had believed that if you built the right institution, the people would follow. She knew now that it was the other way. You built the people, you held them to account. You made the culture visible, and then you made it real, not in the founding documents, but in the ordinary moment when a woman walked through your doors in clothes that didn't announce her and was treated simply like she belonged there. Because she did. Gloria had written 8 words. I thought your company was supposed to be different. Diana had read them on a Friday morning. On a Tuesday, she had walked into her own branch and learned that her company was not yet what she had told herself it was. And on the days that followed, she had decided, with the same absolute certainty she had carried from a church basement in Vine City to a 40-story penthouse in Buckhead, that it would be. Not for the press release. Not for the optics. For Gloria. For the physician who waited 55 minutes. For the student whose scholarship looked like evidence. For everyone who had walked through a door that had her name on it and been made to feel like a suspect in a building they were paying to use. For all of them, and for the version of herself she had almost let herself become, the kind of leader who built equity into the founding documents and called it done. That version of Diana Landrum died on a Tuesday morning at Peachtree Street. What walked back out through those glass doors was something harder and clearer and considerably more dangerous to anyone who thought institutional silence still meant permission. If this story moved you, if you've ever been made to feel like you didn't belong in a room that was built for you, share this video. Send it to someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe, because the next story in this series is one that I promise you are not ready for. Drop a comment. Tell me, what would you have done in Diana's position? Would you have kept your calm? Because I'm not sure I could have. See you in the next one.